In the mid to late 2010s, Weekly Shonen Jump went through some strong growing pains. Of the so-called Big Three, Naruto finished publication in 2014, Bleach soon followed in 2016, and One Piece, well, it'll persist much longer than what's even being discussed here. Still, this time period felt like the closure of an era. In the coming years, many new titles would attempt to establish themselves in what is the largest and most competitive manga magazine. Of course, most of them would never reach the top, or worse yet, garner any sort of meaningful success. These new titles had to actively decide whether to imitate what was successful or diverge into something more unique. The problem is, either one of these options can result in a lukewarm response. If a manga imitates other series too much, it runs the risk of not standing out in the crowd. Likewise, if a manga is just too weird for the magazine's standards, it might be rejected by even the most loyal of Shonen Jump readers. When a manga breaks through that barrier of entry and becomes a success, imitation can become adaptation, and being weird can become innovation. These are the two most common paths for a successful manga, setting the trend or breaking away from it. This is how Demon Slayer and Chainsaw Man represent two opposing forces in Weekly Shonen Jump. If I were to compile the tropes and cliches of shonen into one series, it would be something like this. An uplifting series that features a hero fighting for the sake of their loved ones, escalating power systems, fantastical transformations, and a villain that represents the opposite of what the hero stands for. Some of these story beats are not specific to shonen, or even manga for that matter, but this is generally the foundation that was set by the pioneers of battle shonen. Let's call that foundation the framework of what it means for a manga to be a standard battle shonen. Plenty of successful and respectable Shonen Jump titles fall into this category, such as the current lineup of Jujutsu Kaisen, Black Clover, and My Hero Academia. These manga often take what has been previously done and bring it to a new generation of manga readers. There is a through line from Dragon Ball to Naruto to My Hero Academia. Dragon Ball's blood still flows through the veins of Shonen Jump today. You can see repeated patterns throughout the history of the magazine, it just subtly changes over time. Though I wouldn't say this repeated pattern is exactly true adaptation, because being an adapter implies an effort to resolve pre-existing problems. Plenty of the problems that existed within Dragon Ball and its contemporaries, power creep, drawn-out battles, and exhausted storylines, still persist in modern day. Few titles have attempted to fix the problems created by the inception of battle shonen. The genre was not being perfected nor revolutionized, that is, until Demon Slayer and Chainsaw Man, thus coming back full circle. In essence, these two were incredibly successful Shonen Jump titles about fighting demons or devils, your preference really, that concluded in 2020. It doesn't really matter which one is better, it's Chainsaw Man. They are both impressive success stories from two perspectives. There's more than one way to win over an audience, and neither can discredit the other's achievements. Still, it's interesting to compare and contrast the vastly different methods the two used to obtain their success. There are a lot of similarities, but the difference is my thesis. Demon Slayer is the adapter and Chainsaw Man is the innovator. But what exactly does that even mean? Sure, one is more normal and the other is more abnormal, but that doesn't truly explain how the two series approach shonen storytelling. To be more precise, Demon Slayer made an earnest attempt to take the strengths of shonen storytelling and streamline it in a fashionable way. Meanwhile, Chainsaw Man abandoned most qualities of traditional battle shonen, both good and bad, in favor of breaking the mold. It's the difference between trying to do something better and trying to do something new. Let's bring back that aforementioned framework and see how both series fit into it. How about we start with power systems and transformations? For Chainsaw Man, the power system isn't its biggest game changer. The powers are relatively simple, albeit exceedingly fun. Denji has chainsaws, Power has blood weapons, and Aki uses contracts with devils. These are often fun, but not entirely new. Although transformations are quite different. In concept, the idea that the devils and fiends represent various human fears is quite fresh. Denji turning into the greatest fear of all who watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a kid is admittedly pretty gnarly, if a bit silly. The versatility these devils and fiends offer conceptually far surpasses what the powers actually do. For instance, what sounds more interesting, a character who can use explosive energy or a devil that represents the fear of atomic bombs? It helps that Chainsaw Man conveys action with excellent paneling and creative uses of violence. The action has a ferocity that can't be rivaled. In this regard, I won't say Chainsaw Man totally breaks the framework, but it does remind me of seinen like Berserk and Dorohedoro more than most shonen. Oddly enough, Demon Slayer doesn't have a lot of transformations, at least not for the human characters. Though Nezuko does have a transformation, and it serves what you would expect, a cool design while improving her strength and speed. Going all the way back to Dragon Ball's Super Saiyan forms, this is as standard as you can get. It does the bare minimum to give Nezuko the power to keep up with the other characters' growing strengths. That said, it doesn't over-explain itself, Nezuko doesn't have to go through a lot of needless training, and it doesn't make her totally overpowered. The transformation's power level feels justified for both the world and her character. The rest of the cast uses fairly simple techniques that are easy to grasp, and it never seems as though a character could just obliterate another. It doesn't change a whole lot from what you would expect out of a sword-based battle shonen, but it also doesn't miss much of a beat when it comes to making logical fights. The power scaling is good because a character who is powerful in chapter 10 is still reasonably powerful in chapter 100. However, did you notice I didn't mention power scaling when it came to Chainsaw Man as opposed to when I did for Demon Slayer? That's because in a more traditional battle shonen, a power system needs to convey a believable escalation of power. Otherwise, outcomes of fights will feel cheap and weaker characters will get left in the dust. That does not matter or even apply to Chainsaw Man, where the power of characters are more symbolic. It doesn't really matter if Denji is overpowered or if a devil has incomprehensible power. It's not a story that is meant to be read for legitimate head-to-head battles. There are no tournament arcs to determine who is stronger than who. What determines their strength is something a little bit more intangible, the horror of concepts much greater than yourself. In that way, the imbalance of each devil's strength is parallel to the imbalance of fears. Demon Slayer does a good job of building its power system and escalation within the standard format, but Chainsaw Man doesn't restrain itself. If it makes sense within the confines of its own world, that's all that matters. Returning to the framework, what about the villains and antagonistic forces? Once again, the two series go about it differently. Take the ways in which they present demons and devils for instance. In Demon Slayer, demons are treated as evil but sympathetic beings that still deserve compassion. It's reminiscent of how most shonen stories portray villains, albeit these characters are generally well written. That's the thing though, these demons are characters that still have to appeal to the reader. They have humanistic traits and tragic backstories. This is the kind of storytelling you would expect from a shonen manga. In Chainsaw Man, devils are far more nightmarish, each representing an innate fear of humans. They are not human-like, but they are a horrifying reflection of humanity. If you look at any given demon and any given devil, it's shocking just how different these two portray the supernatural. Likewise, Tanjiro kills demons with a degree of emotional sympathy, whereas Denji brutally slaughters his foes with zero remorse. Their portrayals as a demon slayer and a devil hunter could not be further apart, even if they are essentially doing the exact same thing by killing the bad guys. The main antagonists offer a great deal of contrast too, because unsurprisingly, they serve the same role in the story, the motivator of the protagonist. Demon Slayer's main antagonist, Muzan, is closer to what you would expect out of a shonen. He is responsible for having killed Tanjiro's family, as well as being the source of all demons, which naturally drives Tanjiro to put an end to him. Muzan is a negative force in both Tanjiro's life and the world at large. Of course he should be defeated. Muzan works well enough as the inciting incident, but perhaps his greatest shortcoming as an antagonist is his personal relationship with Tanjiro. Frankly, Muzan as a character hardly matters. So long as he kills Tanjiro's family, the story will play out the same way every time. Tanjiro will want to put an end to him, and eventually he will. Although he causes the event that motivates Tanjiro, Tanjiro's motivations don't have much to do with who Muzan specifically is. This is where streamlining a shonen story might show some weaknesses, because Muzan just kinda does what a shonen villain needs to do in order for the story to begin and end, which makes his presence in the story feel a tad underwhelming. This might be the one time that Demon Slayer didn't do enough to truly improve upon the battle shonen framework and merely fits in with the crowd. The same cannot be said of Makima, who motivates Denji in a far more intimate way. She is the control devil, and all aspects of her characterization revolve around this fact. Ruthless and void of empathy, her relationship with Denji is founded on her taking advantage of his desires. She deliberately manipulates Denji with allusions to romance, the one thing he wants more than anything, and gives him the faintest pleasures in life only to sadistically rip it all away from him. You could not possibly change Makima as a character without drastically changing the dynamic between her and Denji. Denji's character, and by extension the entire story, is dependent on the duality of a cruel master and an ignorant dog. She is an irredeemable soul, and that makes her a great villain, but it's how involved she is with the protagonist that makes her a fantastic antagonist. I'm almost surprised that Makima can even exist in modern Shonen Jump at all. The magazine has brutal stuff here and there, but the large majority of villains seemingly have a tragic backstory or something to soften the blow. Ironically, despite her love for dogs, albeit twisted love, she reminds me of a less hammy and even crueler Dio Brando. Makima is an immensely cruel villain, the likes of which modern Shonen Jump just does not offer with this one exception. If nothing else, I've never seen an antagonist be literally cooked and eaten by the protagonist. That was a new one. Last on the list, how about the motivations for why the heroes fight? Demon Slayer's story opens with Tanjiro losing his family to a demon attack, all except for his sister Nezuko, who has been transformed into a demon. The two set out in hopes of finding a way to turn her back into a human and to stop demons from killing more people. The hook of Demon Slayer is that it takes the shonen trope of protecting one's family and friends and embodies it all in Nezuko's safety. Tanjiro has already lost most of his family, and as such, protecting Nezuko is his last hope. It takes a fairly standard idea of protecting your loved ones and gives it an emotional oomph. Tanjiro's motivations come across as more believable than most, but it still fits within the framework, especially when we consider the additions of his friends. However, this is possibly the greatest difference between Chainsaw Man and Demon Slayer, as well as most battle shonen. Denji is an orphan boy that has sold organs and even one of his testicles to survive. On top of that, he is forced to fight devils with his chainsaw dog to pay off the debt that his father left him with. His life is empty, totally devoid of any gratification. His dreams are to eat bread with jam and to simply hug a girl. He has nothing, and even the most basic of human desires, eating and romance, are beyond luxury for him. His desires are understandably selfish, and they never stop being selfish. The idea that he might get to kiss or grope a girl drives him further. He wants to experience pleasures that life has forbidden him. Like Tanjiro and most shonen heroes, his motivations are sympathetic, but it doesn't make him a hero at all. He isn't merely trying to save people, he wants to be rewarded with the things that he could have only dreamt of previously. These two characters are unbelievably far apart, and the ways they interact with the other pieces of their story are even more distant. Where Tanjiro wants to protect his last family member, Denji has no family. Where Tanjiro fights to save people's lives, Denji fights to possibly touch a girl. The two represent opposite ends of the spectrum, and it isn't a coincidence that Tanjiro is on the more common side of things. At this point, it should be obvious that's almost always the case with both of these series. Sometimes, simply reusing a tried and true framework can become a manga's strength. Demon Slayer uses that to its advantage to create one of the most consistent and structurally sound shonen manga of the 2010s. It took the most widely appealing narrative tropes of battle shonen to tell a simple and concise story that anyone could get behind, rather than elongating its story, grasping at straws for how to continue making more out of its premise and characters. Demon Slayer tells a straightforward shonen story. It manages to do that without all of the common potholes that so many of its contemporaries have fallen into for decades. In a reasonable 23 volumes, Demon Slayer fully realizes its cast of characters, comes to a natural conclusion, and does not let power creep diminish its action. You could say it merely took what had been done before and just condensed it, but that undermines the proficiency required to recognize what was good about Battle Shonen, restructure it, and elegantly tell it in a more digestible way. It didn't break the mold, and hardly anything about it is entirely unique to it alone, but it serves as a great vessel to what makes shonen so endearing. In 2020, it outpaced every other manga to ever exist, with record-breaking numbers that have never been seen before. I think that's because nearly everyone likes a good traditional shonen story, but not everyone wants their time wasted. I won't say that Chainsaw Man didn't borrow from other series, because it did, but it so radically intensified those ideas that it hardly even reflects the magazine it was in. It has all of the same building blocks of the next shonen. It is fundamentally similar to Demon Slayer or Jujutsu Kaisen, but what Chainsaw Man built out of those blocks is entirely new and exciting. If Demon Slayer thoughtfully cut down on the fat of shonen storytelling, Chainsaw Man violently grabbed the very existence of shonen and shook the hell out of it. It's almost like furiously shaking a can of soda and immediately opening it just to see how crazy things can get. It doesn't conform to what the reader has come to expect and doesn't chase trends. Sure, there may be a character that has a similar setup to another character you've seen before, but I can assure you it won't end the same. By all means, Chainsaw Man is a one-of-a-kind manga and innovator that doesn't set the standard, but breaks the standard. Looking at the two side by side, one is a dignified and thoughtful summarization of shonen storytelling, and the other is a rebel that stops at nothing to break the rules. One is a comfort food, and the other is a box of Bean Boozled jelly beans. You know what though? Shonen manga needs both Demon Slayers and Chainsaw Mans, adapters and innovators. One's job is to perfect the shonen stories that we love, and one's job is to redefine what it is that we do love. Demon Slayer is not the most original manga I've read, nor is Chainsaw Man the new standard for shonen. If anything, Shonen Jump will continue to see imitators of Demon Slayer, and there will be outliers that try to push the magazine in new directions like Chainsaw Man did. They both have the potential to inspire the next big thing, just as previous adapters and innovators have. There will come a day where both become old classics, and for different reasons, they'll be appreciated by shonen fans. That's the nature of shonen manga, the nature of two opposing forces in Shonen Jump. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you want to follow me on my socials or check out my art like the animation on screen, links are in the description. Until next time.